Welcome to another episode of Out from the Horrorbox. I'm your gunslinging host, Dom, and in this episode, we'll be taking a trip into the mind of a horror writing master. This will cover the first two novels in the Dark Tower series. And I know I've talked a long time, I think maybe like a year or more, about doing this series, the Dark Tower series. And guys, I know that I was going to do the books that connect to this that are really important first, but then I got to a certain point and I was like, we've done enough books, I think, that are connected in a loose way to these that don't really get into too much of like the spoiling anything for the series. So that's why I decided to kind of change things up. So we're gonna do we have 3 more on the beam episodes. They'll come one will come a little later, and then or yeah, I think that's what I'm thinking. 3 more or maybe 2 more, just depending on how I decide to do it. It might be 2, but one will come after we get done with the 4th book in the Dark Tower series, and then the last one will come. So yeah, we'll just do 2 instead of 3. So the last one will come right before the last book in the Dark Tower series, and they'll just be the only reason why I'm doing it like that is because it's they're going to go over things that's going to spoil a lot for the novels to come. So that's why I was like, I really want to get into them, but if we get into them, then they spoil things. So that's why I just decided, you know what, we need to start getting into this series for me to start going over this other stuff. So without further ado, let's kind of go over what each book is going to be about. So with the first one, we'll start our journey with Roland Deschain in the first novel in the series, The Dark Tower, The Gunslinger. In a desolate, time-warped world that has moved on, Roland of Gilead, the last gunslinger, pursues the enigmatic man in black across a haunting, surreal landscape. Roland's quest is singular, to reach the Dark Tower, a mythical nexus of all universes that holds the key to salvation or oblivion. The novel unfolds as a series of interconnected vignettes. Roland encounters a relic of a fallen civilization, a town driven to madness by the man in black's manipulations, and later bonds with Jake Chambers, boy from 1970s New York, who inexplicably appears in Roland's world. After a heart-wrenching sacrifice beneath a crumbling mountain, Roland confronts the man in black. Revealed to be Walter O'Dim, a sorcerer, he delivers a chilling prophecy via tarot cards, revealing Roland's fate and the tower's connection to infinite realities. The novel ends with Roland stepping onto the shore of the Western Sea, gazing towards the horizon where his next trials and the tower itself await. Next, we'll move to the second novel, The Dark Tower, The Drawing of the Three. Following his cryptic encounter with the Man in Black, Roland Deschain awakens on the shores of the Western Sea, weakened and delirious. He sees strange creatures come out of the sea, calling them lobstrosities, and one attacks, biting off his first and second finger of his right hand and his right big toe. Escaping, his journey toward the Dark Tower takes a drastic turn when he discovers 3 mysterious doors standing on the beach, each a portal to a different decade in New York and the mind of a pivotal person. The first door reads, The Prisoner. Roland steps through the first door into the mind of Eddie Dean, a heroin addict mid-airplane heist. The second door reads, The Lady of Shadows. The second door leads to Odetta Holmes, a wealthy, kind civil rights activist with dissociative identity disorder. Her vicious alter ego, Detta Walker, despises Roland and Eddie. The third door reads The Pusher. The final door reveals Jack Mort, a psychopath who orchestrates tragedies, including Odetta's childhood accident. Roland forces Mort to save Jake, the boy from the gunslinger, from death in 1977. Then severs their link. The duo must unite Odetta and Detta into a singular consciousness, Susanna Dean. With Eddie and Susanna now part of his quartet, Roland marches north along the beach, his quest renewed. Now we step into the world of the Dark Tower. Home is now behind you. The world is ahead. To start our journey, in 1970, Stephen King embarked on his epic Dark Tower saga. At just 22 years old and a college student at the University of Maine, King was inspired by a mashup of Robert Browning's poem Childe Roland to the Dark Tower Came, Sergio Leone's spaghetti westerns, and J.R.R. Tolkien's mythic world building. King began drafting a surreal, genre-blending story about Roland Deschain, the last gunslinger in a dying Old West-like world. King wrote it in fits and starts over more than a decade while simultaneously producing blockbuster horror novels like Carrie, The Shining, and The Stand. The novel that would become The Gunslinger was a long and fragmented labor of love. Initially published as 5 separate stories in the Magazine of Fantasy and Science Fiction between 1978 and 1981, The Gunslinger was later revised and compiled into a singular volume by Donald M. Grant, a small press publisher specializing in limited editions. The following year, because the Pet Sematary cover noted The Gunslinger among King's previous works, many fans called the offices of King, Grant, and Doubleday wanting more information on the already out-of-print book. This led to another run of 10,000 copies. Released as a hardcover with striking illustrations by Michael Whalen, the book had a modest print run, targeting collectors rather than mass-market audiences. Despite its niche debut, The Gunslinger laid the foundation for King's magnum opus, a sprawling series that would weave together elements of fantasy, horror, sci-fi, and westerns, while intersecting with nearly every other book in King's bibliography. And that's kind of why we needed to go through a couple of books to get to this point. You'll really see that as we go along. Over time, as King's fame grew, the novel was republished for wider audiences, and Roland's quest for the Dark Tower became a cornerstone of King's literary universe, culminating in a revised and expanded edition in 2003 that better aligned with the series' later continuity. And that's kind of where we'll go from there, because I'll kind of explain it when I get into my thoughts on the novel. But there's a reason why we'll stick with the revised edition and not go with the original edition, just because, or like the original version, just because there's things that connect back and change, and it's called the revised and expanded edition for a reason, and I'll talk about it more then. But for now, as we're now in the world of the Dark Tower, let's start with the very first one, the Gunslinger. The man in black fled across the desert, and the gunslinger followed. The first novel of the series begins seemingly in the middle of the story, following Roland Deschain, the last gunslinger. The novel is set in All-World, as Roland journeys across the desert in a quest of the man in black. He meets Brown, a farmer, and Zoltan, his pet raven. Roland spends the night there and recalls his time in Tull. The man in black had also lingered in the town, resurrecting a dead man addicted to the opiate like devil grass, and leaving a trap for Roland. Roland encounters the local church's leader, who informs him that the man in black has impregnated her with a demon. Roland is compelled to kill every citizen of the village, as she sets the entire community against him. Roland arrives at an abandoned Waystation and meets Jake Chambers for the first time. Roland passes out due to dehydration, and Jake gives him water. Jake has no idea how long he's been at the Waystation or how he got there, and he ducked as the guy in black walked by. Roland hypnotizes Jake to learn the facts of his death, and learns he died in another world that looks to be much more similar to our own in nature. While heading to school in Manhattan, he was shoved in front of a car. Before leaving, Roland and Jake look for food in the cellar. Roland encounters a demon. Roland subdues the demon and extracts a jawbone from the hole where it spoke to him. Roland and Jake finally make it out of the desert, and Roland saves Jake from a succubus encounter and urges him to keep the jawbone as a protection charm. Roland couples with the succubus, an oracle, in order to learn more about his fate and the road to the Dark Tower. In a flashback, it is revealed that Roland is Stephen Deschain's son. The memory also recounts Roland's severe training at the hands of his tutor, Court. Roland explains how he was duped into a premature test of manhood by battling with Court at the age of 14 before any other trainee. Martin, Stephen's magician, who seduced Roland's mother, Gabrielle Deschain, irritated him. It is well acknowledged that this was a period of unrest and upheaval. In combat, Roland overcame Court via weapon choices, sacrificing his hawk David to distract Court. This is not the only time Roland will sacrifice a friend in order to achieve his goal of reaching the tower. Jake and Roland see the man in black at the mountain, and he warns them that he will only meet one of them on the other side, exacerbating Jake's suspicions that Roland will either murder or forsake him. Roland and Jake ride an antiquated railway handcar through the mountain's twisty tunnels. They are assaulted by enormous subterranean creatures known as slow mutants. As the track on which they are moving begins to fail at the tunnel's exit, Roland lets Jake fall into an abyss and continues his journey. This is where Jake says, "Go then. There are other worlds than these." Roland descends the mountain after sacrificing Jake to talk with the man in black, also known as Walter. Walter predicts Roland's fate using a deck of cards that includes omens like the sailor, the prisoner, the woman of shadows, death, and the tower itself. Walter claims to be a puppet in the hands of Roland's actual antagonist, who now controls the Dark Tower itself. The man in black also discloses his identity as Martin. He then sends Roland a vision of the cosmos, speeding out past a red planet with canals, a ring of rocks, a big stormy planet, a ring planet, and then to galaxies and beyond, aiming to shock Roland by demonstrating his true insignificance. Walter then requests that Roland abandon his quest. When Roland refuses, the man in black orders him to walk west before putting him to sleep. When Roland awakens, it has been 10 years, and there is a skeleton next to him that he believes is Walter's. Roland removes the jawbone from the skeleton before proceeding to the Western Sea. Okay, so here's going to be my thoughts on the Dark Tower, the Gunslinger. It has probably the greatest opening line of everything, of any book, anywhere, any kind of narration that you could think of. The man in black fled across the desert, and the Gunslinger followed. Other than that, I would say as a start to a series, it's probably maybe the weakest novel. There is one more that's coming along that a lot of other people would consider the weakest novel. Although I kind of flip flop between both of those because I felt there's more merit in that other novel than this one. This one does good to set up our protagonist for the story, quote unquote protagonist, because I mean he is. But there's also other people too involved. It's only like 300 pages, maybe around there. It's still a very hard novel to get through. It's very dry. It's very yeah. It really, you can tell like this must have been published like part by part, because it's very, each part kind of is like a self-contained story. Um, it's just, and it really, when once you get through the whole series and you look back at this one, you're just very much like, the, why did this need to be the first novel? And it's like Stuck is the first novel, especially once, like, especially if you're trying to pick this up and you're trying to, and you have no idea what the whole series is about, and you're being told, hey, read the Dark Tower series, it's pretty good, and you start with this one, and you're kind of like, it does feel very slow. It's very dry. It's very like, I don't know, like, okay, so there is the revised and expanded edition compared to the original one. The original one, I think, so what the changes are like, he adds like some characters that are some types of characters that will come up later. Like it's called a Tahine. It's like a humanoid with a bird head. He changes some things with the person he stays with and sleeps with in town. Her name's Allie, and in the original text of the original book, original publishing, he kind of, someone uses her like a shield, um, and he goes and kills her just out of nowhere. Like, it's not like provoked or anything. He just, you kind of see this more ruthless kind of Roland. Whereas with the revised, it's said that she's been possessed because she was told by the Man in Black to ask this man to say the number 19, which will come up later. That's something that's also added. If she says it to the man he resurrected, he'll explain like death to her, and it's just like this ticking time bomb. And she does say it to him, so she's gone mad and crazy. So that's why he kills her. Um, they they change it from just being like this kind of abstract demon called, because in the original text it's the beast. We'll later see, because I guess I could say it now, because it is in this version. We see that there's she says that she's impregnated with the child of the Crimson King, who will come up later. We'll explain him a little bit better later, but just know that it does pop up in this. Some other things that they kind of change is just that, like, later in the series they talk about how like paper is scarce, but in this one, in the original publishing of the Gunslinger, he's got paper like it's like nothing, and he like it like he just kind of clears up little discrepancies like that for later. He does change like towards the end with Walter. I think in the original one it was meant to just be like he reads the tarot and then like it's the next night and then he's just dead and he's gone or something. Like, it doesn't really, like, it's not all this time passes. Like, he updated that for the revised edition, and it's pretty much things like that. There's like nothing really majorly overhauled that changes. And he was going to originally go back and revise all, at least I think like the first four novels to make them better align with the last three novels. But when he got done with this, and he was just like, that's good. That's good enough. Although I really wish he would have at least gotten to the second one. You'll see why. But so like I do like the story, the way that it's presented, like the story where he gets to Brown at the edge of the desert, and he stays with him, and he explains it. He came from Tull, and then it kind of goes back, and it goes back, and it's this kind of really interesting storytelling. The stuff with Tull is fine. Meeting Jake, I think, is probably like when it starts getting a little bit better, especially when they get to the mountains and they get out of the desert. And then, yeah, like with the speaking demon or the oracle or whatever it's called, That's kind of interesting, but and then getting under the mountain, I like they see the man in black as they climb the mountain, and he goes under, but they try shooting at him. It doesn't work because he has magic. And when they get under, like he starts, he sees like the like wreckage of like an oil, like an is it Amco? I think I don't. I re-listened to it. I haven't I read it a few. I've read the novel I think like 2 or 3 times, but just recently I re-listened to the audiobook. So forgive me if I don't remember exactly because I'm actually reading or I'm listening to the fourth one right now. I don't really remember if it's like Amco or Sitco. I know Sitco's in like the fourth one, but there's like some kind of like gas station that's under the mountain that was there, and it's like, oh, like there's all these like little references, like on the piano in Tull they're playing Hey Jude, and there's all these like little connections to our world, like maybe like at some point in this world, like they had these things, and then like he says at different points in times he like always tells Jake like the world has moved on here. So there were like, and he explains how like at what like the Waystation that what some point during at some time way before, people used to travel along from like Tull through the desert to like the next place, and that way station was like a point where they could stop and they could get water, they could get some food and stuff. But then eventually people just moved on, and they talk about like a lot of things that they have like a lot of machines or like things walking around like robots and stuff that nobody knows who built them. They just are there, and the world has just moved on. Like he calls them like the great old ones. They built all this stuff, and then something happened, and then came their period of time, and then things have just started to move on from there. Like the world, that's why the world just seems kind of weird and warped. But we'll start learning about why like later. But when he reads them like the tarot, I think the idea of like letting Jake fall and letting him pass off into like, because he says, go, there's other worlds than these. I think it was very interesting, especially for the first one where it does. And see, here's like the thing I think is kind of like the issue for this novel. I was listening to another because I want to know people's opinions and their ideas on the Dark Tower, and I always look through like the Wikipedia. I always look through the Reddit subreddits of the Dark Tower. I listen to audio or podcasts about it. I try watching videos, and someone said it feels like more of like this is like a prequel novel, and I was like, yeah, that's kind of what I thought before. Like it doesn't set much up. It sets enough of like the backstory for Roland, and that Roland is very like easily gonna throw people away, and that's gonna be something that comes up later in the novels as well. But the thing is, like, it if you there was one point where I reread the novels, and I didn't reread this one. I started with the second one, and it really reads like when you go back and you read from the second one on, it kind of does feel like that. Like there's nothing the only significant thing that happens is the ending of this novel, where the man in black reads the tarot. Oh, and Jake dying. Well, there's another thing also, but I'm not going to talk about it now because it's going to be important later. There's, I guess, like 3 significant things. It's the tarot reading at the end, it's letting Jake die, and then the third thing. The third thing, like I said, I'll talk about later when we get to that point. Anyways, yeah, I mean, it is a good background like novel. Like when you learn about court and you learn about the cook hacks, how he was going to betray, and so there's something I didn't bring up was that that Roland's father, Stephen Deschain, is kind of like the king in the in Gilead, and his mom's kind of like the queen. He's kind of like a prince. His dad is like the leader of the gunslingers, and at this time there's and I think it gets fleshed out more in the next novel. I know that they mention him. They bring up the good man John Farson, who's I know that really comes out in the fourth novel, but there's this kind of like a revolution going on while Roland's a teenager or a young kid into being a teenager, and so there's these people who are quietly trying to assassinate all the gunslingers, and that's Hax, who's a cook, and they overhear him talking to someone about poisoning the food, and so then they go and tell their dads about it, and so Steven's the leader, and they end up hanging him, and that's one of the first times Roland got to like see the consequence of like actions of like these, and then also we get a good backstory of like of Roland. He was kind of coaxed into doing the whatever the challenging to become a gunslinger early. I don't know why I blanked on that. He does it early because we learned that Martin basically was cheating or using basically his mom and Martin, the dad Steven's like advisor, his magician, his advisor. He called him in when after they had sex, and kind of like showed him like, look at what I'm doing, look at what your mother's doing. And so it causes Roland to get angry and want to test for being a gunslinger early so that he could get his guns and he can kill Martin. So he goes and challenges Court, and that's when Court and he beats Court, and he becomes a gunslinger at being one of the youngest gunslingers of all time at the age of 14. And see, like, it's all important, but it's not like it doesn't. When we get later into the story, you're gonna be like, yeah, I can see why like you could consider this like a prequel that maybe you should have written later. Like maybe I don't know if this necessarily should have been the start of it. I feel like you could have started like at the Waystation, and I don't know. I feel like there's ways he could have done it that could have that still would have been a flow with this. That you could have just like cut things down, crunch things down, squish some things together, mush things together. Especially like when we get because a lot of people will say they didn't really get into it until the second novel, and we'll see why. But with this one, I think it's a fine opening. You can tell that like he did start writing it when he was younger, and like he had an opportunity to really go back and really adjust things, but he just didn't. He just kind of changed a couple things here and there. Overall, I think I give this maybe like a 3. I don't think I'd give it more than that. I don't want to give it like 2.5, but it feels like it sits kind of near there. To me, it's very much like a New Hope, right? Where it's starting to kind of build off this world with this kind of standalone story, but you can tell like it doesn't really hit its stride till like other things. And I know that might be controversial for people listening who love Star Wars. What the New Hope is the best one? Like, is it? Because I feel like there's a better one that comes up later. But yeah, like I don't know. I'd give it a 3 out of 5 for this, just because it's the start of the series. It's got its like growing pains for it, and it's just a little dry. We'll leave it for now though, and move on to The Dark Tower 2. The Drawing of the Three. After the cult success of The Gunslinger, the surreal, fragmented Western fantasy initially serialized in the Magazine of Fantasy and Sci-Fi, Stephen King hesitated to continue Roland Deschain's saga. The first book's limited edition release had garnered a niche but passionate following, yet King feared the story was too strange for mainstream audiences. By the mid-1980s, however, spurred by fan demand and his own fascination with Roland's world, King began drafting The Drawing of the Three. This time, he embraced a bolder, more accessible approach, blending the series' mythic roots with the breakneck pacing of a crime thriller and the psychological depth of his best character work. Written during a period of personal turmoil, including struggles with addiction that mirrored Eddie Dean's arc, the novel marked a tonal shift, infusing dark humor, pop culture nods, and a multicultural New York into Roland's archaic quest. Published as a mass-market paperback by New American Library, it introduced the quartet dynamic that would define the series, while subtly weaving ties to King's multiverse. Though initially overshadowed by King's horror hits, The Drawing of the Three became a turning point, proving the Tower's viability as a sprawling, genre-defying epic. Its success paved the way for the series' expansion, including revised editions of The Gunslinger to align with later lore. This is The Drawing of the Three. Starting several hours after the end of the previous novel, Roland wakes up on a beach and is attacked by lobster-like creatures, which he dubs as lobstrosities. He kills the creature, but not before losing the index and middle finger of his right hand and most of his right big toe. His untreated wounds soon become infected. Feverish and losing strength, Roland continues north along the beach and eventually encounters 3 doors. Each door opens onto New York City at a different period in time: 1987, 1964, and 1977, respectively. As Roland passes through them, he brings back the companions who will join him on his quest to the Dark Tower. The first door, labeled The Prisoner, reveals Eddie Dean, a young heroin addict in the process of smuggling cocaine into New York for the mob boss Enrico Balazar. Roland brings Eddie back through the door so Eddie can hide the cocaine and get through a customs inspection. But the agents have become suspicious and subject him to interrogation and surveillance. Balazar learns of these events and kidnaps Eddie's heavily addicted older brother Henry to force Eddie to deliver the drug. At Balazar's bar, Eddie claims he can produce the drugs from the bathroom. Eddie is strip searched and the bathroom torn apart, and no drugs are found. Eddie is allowed to enter the bathroom completely naked and accompanied by Jack Andolini, one of Balazar's henchmen. In the bathroom, Eddie drags Andolini into the gunslinger's world. During a brief scuffle, Andolini is injured by Roland and then eaten alive by the lobstrosities. Eddie and Roland re-enter the bathroom and, overhearing that Henry has died from an accidental heroin overdose given by Balazar's men, engage in a victorious shootout. While still mourning the death of his brother, Eddie decides to throw his lot in with Roland. Before the pair return through the door, they acquire antibiotics Balazar kept in his bathroom for addicts who have acquired infections from IV needle use. They escape just as NYPD raids the bar. With Eddie tending to him, Roland slowly recovers from his infection. The second door, labeled The Lady of Shadows, reveals Odetta Holmes, a black woman with dissociative identity disorder that Eddie incorrectly labels as schizophrenia, who is active in the civil rights movement. She is wealthy and missing her legs below the knees after being pushed in front of a subway train. Odetta is unaware that she has an alternate personality, a violent, predatory woman named Detta Walker that was brought on by head trauma at a young age. Roland and Eddie are forced to contend with both personalities when Roland brings Odetta's body into his world, with Detta suppressing Odetta during most of their travels. Odetta eventually returns, and she and Eddie venture alone towards the final door after Roland's infection recurs. The pair find the third door, labeled the Punisher, where Eddie leaves Odetta armed with one of Roland's revolvers and hurries back with her wheelchair to retrieve Roland. When they return, Odetta is gone, and Detta hides waiting to strike. After Roland enters the third door, Detta captures Eddie and uses him as bait for the lobstrosities, hoping to force Roland to come back and return her to her own world. Instead of revealing a new companion, the third door leads Roland to Jack Mort, a sociopath who takes sadistic pleasure in injuring and killing random strangers, and the man responsible for the traumas that created Odetta's second personality and cost her both her legs, as well as the death of Jake Chambers. Roland arrives in Jack's body just as he is about to push Jake into traffic, the event that leads to Jake's appearance in The Gunslinger, and stops him from doing so. Under Roland's control, Jack acquires the medicine and ammunition Roland needs to survive, then jumps in front of the same subway that hit Odetta/Detta years ago. Roland returns to his world just before impact, having made sure Detta sees Jack's death in order to force the two personalities to confront each other. As they attempt to cancel each other out, they merge into a third, stronger personality, Susanna Dean. Susanna stops the lobstrosities from trying to eat Eddie. As the group travels away from the beach, Eddie, having broken his drug addiction after a painful withdrawal, begins to fall in love with Susanna. Both owe their lives to Roland, who is acutely aware that he may eventually need to sacrifice them to reach the tower. All right, well, let's get into my thoughts on The Drawing of the Three. Being the second novel and starting kind of right where you left off on the first novel, okay, kind of cool. Like it's kind of like in The Force Awakens, it ends where she's handing the lightsaber out to Luke, and the Last Jedi kind of picks up right then and there, and he throws it away. But with this, we pick up right with Roland right away, and we see him get kind of disabled pretty much out from the start. I think the reason why he decided to kind of disable him was because, as we learned from the first novel, and we'll see from in this novel and later novels, Roland is basically a killing machine. And I think you needed to kind of disable him because it's like needing kryptonite to hinder Superman, because if you just had Superman, the movie would be over like that, right? Like Roland would just be able to take everything out. Like he'd be able to take out the lobstrosities like nothing. But the fact that he is kind of like exhausted by the time he gets to the beach, and he's just kind of laying out like asleep, and he didn't see them or hear them, which is funny because that one he does see them and hear, and like finally does realize that they're there, and they make like a data chum, like they're talking, but that's like just the sound that they make. But yeah, like it's too late. They bite off his first and second finger of his right hand, which is like that's his dominant hand, and it's showing like he is really good with his left hand, but it's not as good as with his right hand. And yeah, like I think he needed a way to kind of like, okay, this character's a little OP. We need to do something to bring him down, especially with the rest of the series. Although I don't think you needed to do this. I think you could have like brought him down with some other things, but because you'll see that he's still like not that underpowered from this. Anyways, I do love this novel is probably one of my favorite ones, honestly, of the Dark Tower series. I like that it picks up right away and starts getting into the action. He's kind of bumbling around a little bit with the like getting poisoned from the bite, and then he sees the doors right away. Like he sees the first door with the prisoner with Eddie, and we get like this funny scene of like him not understanding that like he's in an airplane, and because he's never been in an airplane before, and then like there's a scene with the stewardess who, she notices like his eye colors change, and like that gives her notice to be like, yeah, he's on drugs. He's got drugs. Eddie is an amazing addition. Like I'm so glad he included him. Eddie's kind of like Larry Underwood, from like The Stand. If you go back and listen to The Stand, he's like this character who's kind of unsure of himself. He does drugs. He's kind of a funny, like haha clownish kind of character. Can't be too serious all the time. But he eventually like kicks his habit and learns to like. He's kind of like it's also kind of like Richie, like in that way of being like never knowing when to like just shut up about certain things. But eventually he learns to like be more serious, and at first he's kind of like, oh, this, I'm a New Yorker, oh, who's this guy coming out of my head? And he does everything that his brother Henry tells him, because he's always like, because Henry's his older brother and had to take care of him um all of his life, and so he gives all this like gratitude to Henry constantly, and like puts him on this pedestal, which he didn't need to, because Henry was just like this kind of burnout, and it's just kind of like you didn't really need to listen to your brother like that much. But then he ends up dying, and that causes him to like go with Roland, because he's like, I got nothing left in my world. And then we get to Odetta slash Detta, and yeah, when Odetta was a little kid, her dad, who I don't know, he did something with like, because he was like a dentist, or he invented some kind of like some kind of dentistry thing. I forgot what it was, but they were rich, and when her whole life, and so when they were walking down the street one day, she gets hit in the head by a brick, and that causes her the split in her personality of Detta and Odetta. And Odetta's very much, yeah, like she's part of the civil rights movement. She goes down south to try and because she's from New York, but she goes down south to do like the freedom rides, and to march with like these people. I mean, march because she's in a wheelchair. She got pushed in front of a train and got her legs cut off, all due to Jack Mort being this horrible, horrible psychopath going around just pushing people. That's why he's called the Pusher. Uh, although this is at a point where I think Stephen King really figured out how to. I mean, I still don't know if he knows how black people or people of color in general talk, because I'll say Odetta seems fine. She seems a little bit more, like, oh, what would an uppity black person talk like? Oh, because she's richer, so she knows how to be a little bit more refined with things. But then Odetta is just a caricature. Odetta is just a huge, just that. Oh, this is what the black people sound like, and it's like constant throughout this novel. But then we finally get Susanna, and we'll see. We get a little bit of Susanna in here. It is a calmed down version of like Detta. But Detta's character is just like over the top. It's like, what are you doing? And it's like, this is what happens when you have a white northerner from Maine who, obviously, in a state where like I feel like they were still pretty racist there. And he's just trying to be like, this is what I think black people sound like. And he's done that before, with especially with like like Dick Halloran. I think Dick Halloran's not as terrible. Like that was, I think that was like might have been like one of the first black characters in it, like an important black character in his novels. But then we see it with like Speedy Parker, and we'll see it with like Mother Abigail, and we'll see it again with like characters here and there. I think even in like The Stand, like the Rat Man, like they all have like this kind of inflection and tone that it's just like, why can't they just have like, I get maybe having like an accent, but like why does it have to be like a character? Why does it have to be, oh yeah, oh shucks, oh yeah, it has to be like that. Why? I don't understand. I mean, I understand it. I mean, this is America in the 80s, and that's your idea of being like, see, she's the bad type of black person that you shouldn't want around. You see how she talks? She talks like she doesn't know how to speak English that well. But Odetta is the good one because she comes from New York, and see, she's more refined. And Susanna is just like the mix of those two. So every once in a while, she's gonna say something that's like, why she still gotta talk like that? I don't know. There's a whole thing you can go into in dissecting that, and I like this idea of not that of I'm trying to move on to a different point. Um, I, it's ridiculous that like I don't think I think it's good that he's including character, especially people of color. He's trying to, but he really should have taken the time to like, I don't know, maybe interact with that community a little bit more. I mean, especially because I think it's not till maybe in like the late, maybe into like the 90s or 2000s that like I think more and more people of color have gotten to know Stephen King a little bit better. That's why I think when you look back and you're like, you yikes, why do you have to say the N word so much? And why is them being black such an important like thing that like it like changes the way that like the people interact with them. Like we finally get a better representation, I think, with Mike Hanlon. But even with Mike, it's like it's still weird because like back in the 50s, I will say that they did use a lot of slurs and derogatory terms, but like even him in the 90s, it's like, I don't know. It's Stephen King and black characters are not always the best. That's what I'll say. Um, but let's move on from there because there'll be plenty of time to talk about Susanna later. I think having him, stop Jack from pushing Jake too. I think that was great. I think, see, it's like little things like this where it's like, I feel like with this, he was like, what the things that he did, like I think he saw that Jake was such a good foil to Roland as a character that he was like, shit, I gotta like undo that. I gotta bring him back somehow because obviously he like I feel like he was working towards like I feel like if that last door was like Jake or something, and then having see it really wouldn't have worked. But he's trying to undo what he did because I think he wants to bring him back, which we might see later. I don't know. I'm not gonna spoil it. But yeah, like it feels like he wanted to undo the thing he did, and this one just tonally, it just shifts, and yeah, like I said, like it starts off where he's on the beach. It kind of starts off a little slow, but he gets to the doors. And then it kicks off from there. Eddie trying to smuggle things in, and then there's this big shootout when he gets to Odetta, and he's in her head, and we get to learn a little bit about her really quickly. But hers is mainly she's pulled into the world right away because they think she's stealing because she's black, and see it's just things like that where it's like why do they have to think she's stealing? Because well, she is because it's Data, but like why do they have to think she? It's 1960s New York, so I guess that's probably why. But then we move on, and we see Eddie and Odetta kind of form this kind of relationship, and then Detta is just there to be like, "Oh, you hunkies, you white crackers, what are you guys doing to me? You're hurting me, this and that." And it's like, okay, I get where you're trying to be like she's like this evil part of her. Well, let's just not get into that again. And then Jack Moore, I think that whole sequence is probably like the best. Is a kind of ticking time bomb of like Odetta's gone off because Eddie had to leave her with a gun, and then there's like I think there's like a tiger or a lion or a mountain lion or something that might be there, and then he's got to bring Roland back because he's like almost dead, and then Roland has to go into Jack's head and go get guns, get ammunition, and like I love like his interaction with New York and getting guns and how like just how in like 1970s how easy it is for Roland to he just gets a bunch of ammunition and guns, and he steals like the cops' guns and stuff, and he makes a big old show, and then he he goes to the pharmacy and he gets all the like the medication, and then in order to like get back, and I don't know if he knows to do this, but I think he's got like an inkling of like some kind of intuition to do this, but right before when he jumps in front of the train in Jack's body, and right before the train's about to hit him, he uses Jack to look back at the door for Odetta to look into the door while he's looking at her. So her looking at herself through the door causes her and Odetta to kind of meet, and that causes their minds to like not heal necessarily, but it creates they merge into Susanna, and from then on, we get Susanna, who's now like quote unquote married to, she's like a couple with Eddie, and that's why she's Susanna Dean, not Walker, like Odetta Walker or Detta Walker or anything like that. It's just it's a great novel. I love that, like, yeah, like he's like Roland needs people. Roland definitely needs like company, because Roland by himself through the first novel is kind of a little boring. Every time he meets with people, it's like, oh, okay, cool. Like when he meets Brown, it's fine. But then when he meets Jake really kind of brings out in him like the side that's like, oh wow, like he needs a companion only because it's like uh it's to draw him from himself to to draw yeah, from him inside of himself, and like to like I don't know, like I think Roland's character like really needs somebody, I think, and we'll learn that this is kind of what the Dark Tower kind of at the heart really is that about finding your people and taking care of them and not just letting them go to waste, actually, learning to love people, embracing them. But we'll see along the way, and maybe that's not necessarily what happens, especially when he just kind of threw away this kid who was becoming like a surrogate son to him, and then he meets these two, and he really starts, and we'll see later, really starts to enjoy their company, even if at first he's a little reluctant to get them and ready and train them, but then he does see in them, they're gunslingers like him. But we'll pick up that back with that in the third book. But for now, I think this one is really good. This one I would say is maybe a 3.5, edging on a 4. Because here's the thing, like, if you look at it from the first book to this one, and you see how much more this expands, like, the characters, right? Right? Yeah, sure, the first one kind of gives you a little bit of the world. This one doesn't really expand on Roland's world as much, but we'll get that in later novels. This one really is about like the character development and characters that he's needed to meet and needing to join him on his journey, right? So that's why I feel like this one really sticks out as like where you could start, because if you like, nothing from the first one really plays into this except for Jake. The stuff with Jake is what really does come in to the story later, especially with the pusher. That's why I'm saying you could probably, if he started later in the first one and kind of mushed it into this one, I think it would be a better first novel. You know, kind of cutting out a lot of the fat, a lot of the things that we don't need to see. I mean, you could tell that the reason why there's stuff with like Tall and there's stuff with like the desert and like all that was just because he was writing it piece by piece. And if it was written as one coherent novel, it probably wouldn't have been that way. Like it does seem like it's like a bunch of like vignette stories prior to the novel of The Drawing of the Three, where then we see this coherent story. Like now we go right where he's like traveling along the beach. He sees these doors. Why are the doors there? Why are they needed to be there? We're not gonna know really about that until later, but they're there, and there's these characters, and then just there's certain things where it's like character wise, where like I said with Data, that kind of hinders it a little bit. So that's why I'd say 3.5 for this one. It is good. Like it is a good novel. Like it's got a lot of action. With the parts with Balazar, and then the parts with Jack Mort, and it's really interesting leading up. But it is really just a setup novel, right? This novel is just to kind of set up, like, oh, here's the things that were told to him, and now we got to fulfill those things, and we got to get these two characters back, and we got to stop Jake from dying as we move into, so then we can move into the next novel. So there we go. It's a fine, like where we're at in the series. So there's, of the Dark Tower novels, there's technically 8, but there's 7 in the original like run of them. The 8th one was done after, and it's kind of like in between. It doesn't really have any significance to the plot or anything like that, like anything crazy. But of the 7, this is the first 2 are kind of like, okay, here we go on the journey. Let's from here now. Let's start getting into things, and you'll start learning. And that's another hindrance too. And I wish you would have gone back to revise this one, because there's not a lot of the like verbiage that will come up later. There's not a lot of the references to certain things that we'll get later. There's not a lot of like that like world building that we'll get later, and like where it's like, but like if these things were there or from the beginning, that we'll see in like the 3rd and 4th book, and then obviously on from there, like why are they not in this one? And you could tell that when he went back to revise the first one, like he tried to include those things in that first one as much as he could in places he could, and it feels jarring now to go from that revised edition to this, because it doesn't include those types of things. It's just things that they say, things that they reference, things that they talk about. That it's like, why are they not talking about these things in this one? Why are they? Why is the like, if he, like, there's just like little things that we'll learn, and I'll talk about it when we get to, especially when we get to the next one. The next one, where things start ramping up more, and we start getting the world building, where we start getting the, the building of like the of everything. Like we'll start seeing more of in depth, because right now we didn't really get more of Roland's backstory, but we'll get more later. Well, right now it's just like, here are these two, and that's pretty much all I gotta say about The Drawing of the Three. Right now, they don't really, you don't really see too much connections to other stories yet. we'll start getting that a little later, but when they start coming, they'll start coming and they'll start hitting faster and faster, and it'll be more and more, and you'll be able to be like, oh yeah, they're up there's one, there's another one. There's like little things here and there though that kind of like are like oh, he was kind of thinking about doing something like this earlier. Like there's things with like the Kennedy assassination where he brings that a lot up in like in like his novels. So you know he was obsessed with that for a long time, and then when he did 11/22/63, he brought that back. But you do see that in here kind of a little bit. Not the idea of going, but no, the idea of like maybe if you're able to go back through, like some of these doors take you to certain time periods, maybe you're able to go back and stop that from happening. What would happen, right? But other than that, like that's pretty much it. That there's no real like antagonist to this novel. What you'll see is like, and here's where I'll start building for my big like ideas on like the Dark Tower series and why he wrote them and why he talked about that, or why, I'm not talking about that, why he started like doing, like he kept going with this, why he wanted to make it his magnum opus, why he wanted to keep going with it. I have a feeling he knew where things were going to go, knew that certain plot points were going to start coming up. I don't think necessarily right here exactly, but it's really with the next novel he really does start coming up with like, okay, where do we go from here? What do we need to do to get to these different points, right? And I think that what he originally kind of wanted to do was do more episodic stories with these characters. And I think you can see that very much so with the 8th book, where it's more of just like another episode that happens to Roland and his quartet. And then that's what I think it was building towards more like, will we ever get to the Dark Tower, Sarah? Will we ever get to the Dark Tower? Will Roland ever learn how to, be a better friend to his friends, or not learn to sacrifice people, this and that? Like I think it was more about this journey, and like we were going to see more. And when we get to a certain point, I'll start talking about like why I think that changed, and especially when it's like, he wanted to. In other stories, he started building his world out with it and like from it, and like there's just like themes and plots and stories that just reoccur in other stories that like you can tell like we're feeding into this idea of the Dark Tower, this idea of this story, like what can come of it, what can go of it, where we go with it, and it just leads to where it's going to lead to. And I think at a certain point he fundamentally changed what was going to happen because it needed to. He needed to change it for himself, not for others. Like he always talks about how when he's writing, he doesn't know where the story is going to go. He just knows that, he's letting the characters tell him where he's going. I think at some point, though, he did have an outline. I think he said that. He had like an outline and understanding of where he was going, but I think that comes up with the 3rd novel rather than like here, because I feel like he knew, like with this thing with Jake, he knew he needed to undo that, bring Jake back, but in order to do that, you have to do all these other things. And so I think setting up certain things like that, okay, fine. And then there's other things that we'll talk about in like on the Path of the Beam, and like some other stories that it's like, yeah, like you were setting up for this or you were setting up for that, and you kind of just decided to let that all go. And we'll see why. But for now, guys, those are my thoughts on the Drawing of the 3. Have you read the Dark Tower series? Do you like the first 2 novels? How about that opening line? Probably the best opening line of any novel. We want to thank you all for listening, and if you like what you hear, please subscribe to get every new episode downloaded. Do you have any personal or fictional, paranormal, supernatural, or unexplainable stories. We would love to read them on the podcast. Please send your stories, recommendations, or anything else to horrorboxpodcast@gmail.com. If you want to show more support, you can follow our socials on Instagram, Threads, TikTok, or check out our YouTube channel, all at Horrorbox Podcast on all sites. Also, you can buy me a coffee at coffee.com/horrorboxpodcast. It really helps out. Until next time, maybe you shouldn't let kids die. This is Dom, signing off from the Horrorbox.